Welcome to this week's episode of The Leadership Lane, and I am joined by the lovely Ange Prajakomo. Ange, welcome.
Thanks, Rita. I'm excited to be here.
Yes, and I'm very excited to have you here. Ange and I met at a program in June this year. So for context, that's a few months ago, because obviously people might be listening to this podcast at any moment in time. So it's a few months ago now. When I met Ange, I was intrigued by what Ange does outside of her work, and her work, of course. So I'll introduce you properly, and then we'll get into the conversation, Ange. But Ange is the founder of the Conscious Living Hub, which I'm sure you're going to talk to us a little bit more about. Although you're also the manager of marketing and communication at Deakin Residential Services, so one of our universities here in Victoria. You're the wellbeing lead at Deakin Residential Services. But aside from all that, you've done a bunch of interesting stuff. So you co-authored one of the Amazon bestsellers, Goodbye Busy, Hello Happy. And we were just having a chat about book colours just before we came on. And you're also the co-host of the retreat, Busy to Balanced, Finding Happiness in a Fast-Paced World, which I think is so important for us. So again, a very warm welcome to you, Ange.
Thank you.
So as I said, when I met Ange, what I was intrigued by is your quest really to help leaders live a more fulfilling life, but through this wellbeing focus, which I think is super important, because I'm talking to leaders every day that are feeling pretty frazzled, and I'll use a word that we hear all the time, but burnt out, and some of them don't even know where to start from, in terms of working on some strategies to help them where they're at. So, and tell us a little bit about your background and your interest in this focus on wellbeing.
Yeah, thanks, Rita. So my background started, I guess, way back when. I guess I was first introduced to the importance of wellbeing just as a kid. Used to be active, played a lot of sport. I then had to decide what to do at uni, and about the only two things I knew I was good at was sport and science. So I went off and did my Bachelor of Applied Science in sport, human movement. And that was really good, because I guess that showed me that, in addition to being physically well, I guess I started to learn about the nutrition side of things. So I sort of started to think more about the way what I put in my body. I probably hadn't thought about that when I was younger. But also we learn a lot about epidemiology. So, just illness and obesity and again, how we treat our bodies and the impact it has. So that was sort of where it started. I then kind of did sliding doors and ended up in marketing. But along the way, and I guess I've been really fortunate to have leadership roles for probably the last sort of 15 to 16, 20 years of my life. I guess it just showed me, to be really well, you need so much more. Like, I'd always ridden on my physical health, and then the workforce sort of showed me that I needed more than that. I needed to be resilient. I needed to have strategies. I needed to, just look after all the other parts of wellbeing. So the fire in my belly never died, and it wasn't until about 5 years ago that I was like, right, this is it. I need to really stamp my authority in this space. This is what I'm most passionate about. And that's when I went and did, my life coaching and corporate wellbeing, and then taking these leads now at Deakin Res as well, to just sort of any opportunity I've got to work with people or share my knowledge, I go and do it.
Yeah, that's great. And I love there, and your insight was, obviously sport and being physically fit sounds like it was always very important to you. What sports did you play as a kid?
Netball was my main one, but then I did dancing, I did calisthenics, I did gymnastics, I ran, whatever I could get my hands on, I did.
Yeah. And I think it's such an important, and it still is an important ingredient, I think, for a lot of people that are leading busy lives, but obviously leaders who I'm working with predominantly, I think they also at some point they have this insight that you share there, that my physical health is actually not enough. And I think our bodies change and evolve over the years. So our ability to maybe do what we used to do, sometimes it's enhanced, sometimes it changes. And I think that insight around, well, I need something else, is critically important. So when you talk about that something else, what have you found, and also working with the people that you work with, what are some of those other things that can enhance their ability to feel well and to have this well-being?
Yeah, so I think it's a lot to do with your values. Like I think the more I work with leaders, it's around what do you need in your life to feel well? And it's usually aligned with values. So yeah, like I still value exercise and healthy eating, and so it is still a big part of my life. I value my kids, and so therefore I work part-time, and I've created that. And then I value, I just value a healthy mind. I think that's probably the main thing now. Like I just, I'm constantly exploring, how do I get my mindset into an even greater growth mindset? What are the pitfalls? Where do I catch when you're catching myself? Because yeah, if I can keep my mind strong and sound, then I just find, I'm sharper and I'm more able to deal with any curveball or anything that gets thrown my way.
I love your distinction there, Ange, on, values, and it's about what you value. It's a little bit, Marcus Buckingham talks about, when he talks about strengths, he talks about, strengths are things that strengthen you. And it reminds me of that around these values. And as you describe them there, it's what do you value, and what do you need to feel well? Along your line of work, I guess, and the research that you've done, I want to get into the book in a minute, but what have you come across as the best definition for well-being that you found that can apply, particularly through a leader lens?
Yeah, so I guess for me, well-being is about just being in a state of thriving. For me, it's about having the energy to do do what's been asked of you. So whether that, I guess, as a leader in the workforce, you need to be able to come to work fit, fit in mind and free of stress, so that you can tackle any challenges that come each day. And then I think the third part of well-being for me is that free of illness. So that's how I would define well-being.
And I guess I was reading an article over the weekend in the press here in Melbourne that people are avoiding going to the GP because of the cost, and costs associated with it. But as a result, they're turning up to emergency departments. And I know this through the work that I do in health, but when they are turning up to emergency departments, their cases are a lot more serious. They're turning up a lot more unwell. From the work that you're doing with people across the community, and the communities that you serve, are you seeing that? Are you seeing that people are more unwell now than what they have been in the past?
Yeah, I feel like we've turned a little bit of a corner. I feel like COVID exhausted people to a degree that I'd never seen before. It was just, I think they use the word languishing, that there was so much uncertainty in the world that being a great leader, they just couldn't do it. They couldn't do it with everything else that was kind of, they were seeing, they were hearing. And I think, unfortunately with burnout and things like that is when people get to such a state that they cannot recognize how far down the rabbit hole they've gone, and they need somebody else to tell them. That's probably what I see the most, that they just, it's too little too late. They're so far down. And that's kind of something that I like to work on with people, is to try to catch them before they've hit that point, and identify those warning signs and things like that, so that they can not get down, not end in that way.
Yeah. So, Ange, I know burnout, I was listening to a podcast actually over the weekend about triggers. It was actually on the Imperfects, which is one of my favorites. So plug for the Imperfects, because I love that particular podcast. And they were interviewing a psychologist that was talking about triggers and the impact of trigger warnings. And I feel that listening to that podcast, it made me really think about, is the word triggers overused? And it's an interesting podcast. I won't say more than that. I think people should jump on and listen to it. But I feel the same question arises for me around burnout, and whether it's become a term that we use as a catch-all for, people feeling exhausted and stressed out. Could you give us, from your perspective, when someone is facing burnout, what are some of the, the things that they should be paying attention to as signals? And what would you categorize as someone being burnt out versus being stressed and a little bit tired and a little bit overwhelmed, just from life in general?
So I guess for me, the key differences is that someone who's on the verge of burnout, they make silly errors. So they just, they forget things. they'll make a mistake at work that's uncharacteristic. They're usually in some state of insomnia, and usually their physical health has also started to deteriorate. So you can sort of see that their skin, won't be as healthy looking. They're not bringing the right foods to work. They're just, drinking too much caffeine. Yeah. But they're making, in the workplace, it's, making those little mistakes. It's forgetting things, it's forgetting to pick the kids up from an activity, all those sort of stuff. They're the real warning signs.
Yeah. And what's, like, from a physiological perspective in our brains, what's causing that? Like, the insomnia, the forgetfulness.
It's just too much in your brain. When you reach, I guess the first stage is you reach a state of overwhelm, and that usually happens because there is just way too much on your to-do list, and you just can't figure out what move to make next. So you don't make any. And you're just in that state of paralysis, and everything just bounces in your brain, and you just sit there and you hope that the bouncing stops, and it doesn't.
Yeah. And I imagine too, with that is accompanied a whole bunch of overthinking. So the overthinking would exacerbate this feeling of overwhelm that exists because your to-do list is a mile long, but then the overthinking would compound it because, it's this cloudiness and then this inability almost to make these decisions, which I think leaders would feel from time to time, no doubt.
And then I think the other, why the people do end up in burnout is because they're too scared to, put their hand up, or they're too scared to ask for help, or they're too scared to say no to something, or they don't want to, too scared to say, oh, I'm not coping, or they think they've got to do it on their own, and so they just keep soldiering on down this path that's not working.
Yeah, it is and for some leaders, I think that, as you say, that inability to put the hand up, it can be filled with vulnerability and shame. And if they've worked their whole lives, to try and get to this point in their career where they think, I'm now at the pinnacle, or I'm reaching the pinnacle in terms of the level of leader that I want to be. And they get there and they think, oh my gosh, this is completely overwhelming. For some, I imagine there would be this whole accompanying feeling of guilt, perhaps shame, vulnerability around, but this is what I wanted. And, what's stopping me from actually having it?
Yeah. And I think there's a bit of a generational switch too. Like there were, it was that badge of honor, wasn't it, of working 80-hour weeks and always being on and never being at home. And so there's probably a bit of a generation that haven't seen enough healthy leaders. They don't have someone there role modeling, what's a good move next? What should we be doing? How do we break these? How do we break these molds that are pre-existing within an organisation that has in the past welcomed long hours and that sort of stuff?
I love that highlight there, Andrew, around healthy leaders. I think that completely resonates as you said that, because we have, for those of us that are, your Gen X's, your Gen Y's, may be different for your millennials that are coming through. But I think for many of us, as you say, leadership, it's kind of like you go hard or you go home. And it's that the harder I work, the more productive, the more successful we are. And we haven't perhaps paid enough attention to the expense. And often it's too late, when we are, before we get to burnout, as you said, it's, physical health deteriorates, we're experiencing insomnia, we're forgetting stuff. They're pretty big warning signs if you think about having a dashboard, like a life dashboard, with those things flashing, going, hey, here are your warning signs. But for so many of us, I think we've experienced leadership that has not felt comfortable or not felt that it's appropriate to highlight those warning signs until it's really late. Like I've had a heart attack and I'm in emergency, and now I need to, do something about my lifestyle, or my relationship, it has deteriorated and it's actually broken down, and now I risk losing my family. I now need to do something about, the way that I'm living in it. That it's often those moments they're the biggest moments of epiphany that you probably want to try and avoid.
Absolutely. I'm trying to solve it before we get to the stage of divorce.
Exactly. Or any other challenges that life may throw. So you mentioned healthy leaders. For you, Ange, how would you describe, what a healthy leader looks like, and what should a healthy leader be doing? If someone's listening to this going, I reckon I've got I'm maybe not quite at burnout, but I am feeling overwhelmed and stressed out a lot of the time, and I would love to be healthier. What are some of the tips that you've got that can help us get on our way?
So tips around what makes us a healthier versus a healthy leader.
Yes, well, both. You can throw in whatever you like.
I'll do the healthy leader one first.
Yeah.
So I think if anyone, is adding more tools to their leadership belt and want to have a dabble, be present as a good wellbeing leader, I think it's about having conversations. So, I regularly have conversations with my staff around how they're feeling. I'm very aware of what makes them tick and, what's who they are outside of work. I think it's also really important to champion good behaviour. That's kind of part of my leadership style has always been, I lead by example. And so because I'm passionate about wellbeing, I'm constantly providing my team with examples of what good leadership looks like from a wellbeing point of view. I think we need to, a good leader in regards to wellbeing space also empowers their team. So I think it's really important that we set our teams up to, make mistakes. Because when they, feel like they're they've got trust at work or whatever, that, you've got their back. I say to my team, I don't mind if you make a mistake, but I want you to think through the answers. I want you to think through what how we're going to tackle this. And I've got your back. If you want to send out an email, that helps make your staff will feel good. Helps them feel well. That's probably what I aspire to do. I think there's lots of pillars of wellbeing. So like with my team, I'll also talk about their financial wellbeing. I just think it's really important that we have conversations with them about all of the areas that make you feel well. We also, what else do I do with my team? I empower my team to take a break. So if I know that they've worked, they might have been in on shoot or something like that, or I can tell they're exhausted. It's like I tell them they can go home at 3 o'clock. I don't want them sitting at the desk like a zombie until 5, just because society tells them they have to sit at the desk. Leave at 3. You'll come back another day and you'll work till 7 or whatever. Like when it's really stressful. And then, we have conversations around healthy eating. We have conversations around doing your 10,000 steps, whatever it is. I think, again, coming back to the point around feeling well is different for everybody. So every person you meet is going to need different things to reach that point of flourishing. So it's tuning in. It's tuning into everybody you have the chance to connect with, finding out what's important to them, and then making sure they put time in their life to fulfill that. And if we can do that as a leader, and we can constantly help the people that we've got, touch points with every day to put something into their week that aligns with what makes them feel well, then they're going to come to work feeling better.
They're great tips around promoting that sense of well-being. And I love what you said there about role modeling and tuning in, because I think you're spot on. The feelings that lead us to well-being and leading a fulfilled life, it's different to everybody. So like I remember doing a lot of high intensity kind of training work, but feeling a need, and I was running at the time, and my life was pretty chaotic and stressful with big job and little kids. And I remember thinking at the time, gee, everything that I'm doing is fast. And I remember actively making a decision to bring in some things that were slower. So yoga, my attempt at meditation, I reckon I'm the world's worst meditator, but so things like playing guitar or things that would slow me down intentionally, because I remember thinking everything is really fast. It felt unbalanced. But I did kind of catch it going, I need something in here that's going to slow me down, as opposed to choosing activities that are just feeding this need for fast and adrenaline and speed and getting stuff done.
Yeah. And that's probably linked to one of your values, right?
Yeah. Yes.
That's really balanced. Whereas other people, they can go quick all the time, that they can maintain that go for how long, 8 hours, 10 hours. And that's okay too. So
Yeah.
I think it's again tuning into what you need to feel well, and,
Yeah.
and listening to that. And I think that's where, you know, when I see, obviously I had the pleasure of working with lots of people who are successful, and, you know, especially, you know, writing the book, and you're meeting lots of people with different stories. But I find more often or not, and what the challenge is and why I work in this space is, people don't then learn the lessons. They're not like, they get to this stage of burnout, they know they're overwhelmed or they've got it, but then they don't go and do the work to figure out what caused it, so they don't make the same mistakes twice. Because I see it too much. I see too many people, you know, burn out. Okay, make these quick fixes, and then they never do the work, and they, you know, just fall back into these old habits and these old traps, and then you just see them getting more and more and more exhausted again.
It is, Ange, that, you know, that leads to this, a real struggle, and almost like like we do know, like a lot of it, you read it, and if they always serve as good reminders. Sometimes you'll take away a new tip around, oh yeah, I could incorporate that. That could be an adjustment that I could make. But why do you think that leaders in particular struggle to address their wellbeing?
I think it's partly to do with not prioritizing it enough. You know, it's not high enough on their busy to-do list. And I'll get to that later. I think there's a little bit of like, when you're a really successful leader and you're spending so much energy doing that well, you actually then don't have the energy to go and also put time into your well-being. So I see that a little bit. You know, a lot of leaders do, you know, work, you know, by habit, work longer hours, or they're traveling, or they're, you know, getting up early for conferences or whatever. So their habits can be impacted. The things that their go-to habits that they rely on at home are all of a sudden out of whack, and they don't know how to deal with that situations, and then they make bad choices. And then, you know, a bit of boundaries, I guess. Like you've got to, I guess wellbeing's got to be a value. If it's not, then leaders won't make any change.
So what can we be doing? So I'm always curious about the things that I train people on and that I facilitate programs on. I always think, wouldn't it be awesome if we're teaching this stuff to kids? Because then by the time they get to adulthood and they become leaders, which for some can happen pretty early on in their career, like you could be leading your first team in your late teens, early 20s if you've been working for 4 or 5 years by then. What are some of the things that we can be incorporating at an earlier stage of development? I mean, you're a mum with, you know, 3 kids too. So what are you observing that we could be incorporating in earlier so we get these lessons earlier?
So again, you know, it's kind of sounds silly, but I always have your wellbeing wheel on the wall. You know, like there's for young kids, there's sort of 7 areas of wellbeing that you can work on with them. There's the physical. So I guess from the get-go, they need to learn how, you know, food, like sleep, eat, and food. Sleep, eat, and exercise, sorry. To me, that is the first one to get right. If kids can start there and be physically strong. We do a lot of stuff with our kids around financial well-being, because I think for me, you know, if kids can have a really healthy association with money early on, then that's going to set them up for success and, you know, have less stress in their life. I think if you can be financially well, life is easier. So that's probably a big one I would work with kids on. Then the spiritual one is easy too, because it's just, you know, exposing them to values and helping them, you know, understand their moral compass. I think it's really important, you know, to have conversations with your kids around, you know, when you're tired and what you need to replenish your cup, having downtime. Like, it's good they see that. It's good that they see you achieving things, but then also, you know, taking time out for you. I think we're a lot luckier in this, you know, generation that both parents are involved, and so they can see mum or dad take some time off, or, you know, do something that is meaningful for them. I'm lucky that I'm still, you know, active in sport, so my kids see me being, again, lead by example. There's nothing I would ask of them that I wouldn't do myself in regards to wellbeing. And then, they're probably the three big ones for younger people. I think that you can start young, that, physical health, the values, the financial, and I think mindset, that's probably the fourth, isn't it? Like, if we can help young people develop a growth mindset around failure. Like, that was probably a big thing for me as a kid. I was a perfectionist and I did not want to fail. I did not want to fail at anything. And so I didn't do things. It was a real blocker for me. So if I can help my kids overcome that earlier, I know it's the same for my husband, if we can help our kids overcome that hurdle younger, and so then they hit the workforce willing to make mistakes and willing to do things at 90% right, not 100, then that's a great skill for them to have moving forward.
I love that notion of the wellbeing wheel. So would you recommend that as a strategy? So we've talked about it obviously in the context of, what we can share with younger people in our lives. And is that something that you would recommend for leaders, adults listening to this, around having this visual representation of what wellbeing looks like for me?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's lots of exercises you can do. There's different wheels in the workplaces. They usually have 5 pillars. So it's your social, intellectual, how are you doing in the workforce, financial, physical, and then your sort of connection, sense of belonging. So depending on where you are, if you're a leader, you can bring out the pillars and talk to your team about that. If you're just having a conversation with a friend, then you can bring in the whole wellbeing wheel, which talks about, relationships with others, your physical environment, do you have a roof? Is it warm? Do you feel safe? All those sort of things. And it is really interesting because, again, we all prioritize things in a different way. And so it's really interesting to just reflect and go, okay, I think I'm, a 7 or 8 in physical, but I'm only giving myself a 3 in relationships, because then it just opens up the opportunity to have a conversation. So if you've only given yourself a 3 in social, and then you're asking the why, often it's, I'm at work, too long hours, or I'm driving my kids to this or that, or by the time Saturday comes along, I'm too exhausted. So then you can kind of figure out, well, what needs to change? What needs to change to stop so that you don't feel exhausted? Oh, I drink too much coffee, or I go to bed too late. Like, it's just a really good conversation starter. And usually you can then figure out what's their trigger, use that word, what's their trigger, and then what do they need to change to get the end result? Because if the end result's been social on the weekend, what do they need to change?
That's great. So, Angie, in terms of this wellbeing wheel, if someone listening today wanted to do this exercise for themselves, what would be the best place for them to start? Because I know you mentioned numbers. So is it like a 3 out of 5, 3 out of 10? Maybe take us through the process so someone could actually start to do this.
Yeah, so it's out of 10. I don't know, I've got my own wellbeing wheel, and so I have a set of questions that I ask under each one.
Yeah.
So I'm sure if you Googled it, you'd be able to find a bit of a template.
Have you come up with your own questions for you, Ange, or is this something you've developed that people can use?
No, so there is one that's out there, and I have tweaked mine to be a little bit more linked to wellbeing, and I remove the physical part from mine, like the environmental one, because I just feel that the people that I'm working with usually have that. So it just really depends on who, you can tailor it to your group. But you ask things like, so say for financial, it's things like, do I have enough money to be able to, if something was to go wrong, so if I got a little bit of a surplus pool, have I got enough money to pay my bills? Do I have enough money to do things that make me happy? So it's not saying am I a millionaire. It's just, do I have good financial well-being? If I got some money on a rainy day. With the physical, it's just things like you'd ask yourself, and then you give yourself a score out of 10.
Yeah.
So with physical, it's, like, do you have enough energy to do the things you want in a day? What are your sleeping habits like? What are your eating habits like? how much alcohol do you consume, and then, it's just a self-diagnosis. You think, okay, well, yeah, I think I'm about, a 6 or a 7. And some people will score highly across the board, and other people who are, a bit more glass half empty will score really low across the board. But then it's finding, okay, well, which one is your lowest? So it's all relative. That's why the wheel's good, because then it puts it into relation with each other, that, oh, actually, that's the one that's impacting you the most. Or if some people might not be happy in the workplace, but actually it's something else that's causing it. So if they can lift that, then when they come into the workforce, they're feeling better.
Yeah. So if someone was to do this exercise, and let's say they picked finances, physical, maybe relationships, maybe their health, maybe work, let's say they picked a whole bunch of categories, maybe 4 or 5, and gave themselves a score out of 10, and they were finding that they scored low on each one, a 2 or a 3. What would you recommend they should do to prioritize without creating a bigger sense or a greater sense of overwhelm?
Yep. So I would usually encourage them to choose the one that they think they could have the greatest impact on initially. So most people will already have access to some resources that it's easier for them to make change. So it does not necessarily has to be the one that's the lowest. It's the one that which one could I focus on now that I think I can make a shift that's going to improve my well-being? Because if that shift happens, then I'm going to be in a better place to cope with something that's maybe even trickier.
So really,
if they don't know where to start with physical.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. So then if that shift happens, then at least they've got some reserve that they're building up to be able to tackle the other stuff. Yeah. Good.
And I do 9 times out of 10 say to people, start with physical. So if you're reaching a state of overwhelm, go to bed regularly at the same time. Think about your diet. We eat 3 times a day. It's the one habit that everybody has. So work on that, focus on that. And then increase your steps, sort of thing.
Yeah, good. And I think starting with physical is probably the one that people are most familiar with, because it's, we can all, even if it's going for a walk around the block or getting some fresh air, as you say, getting yourself off to bed, it's amazing what can be achieved just through getting a bit more sleep, and quality sleep too. Because I think we can all take ourselves off to bed, but if we're looking at a screen for 2 hours and then turning the light off, we might be impacting the quality of our sleep. Yeah, that's great. Great tips, Ange, and I reckon that's things that people could easily put into place and implement. So I want to now go to your book, because you did write a book, Goodbye Busy, Hello Happy, and you co-authored that book. And one of my pet peeves is people using the term crazy busy and really busy. So I can't stand it. I've not just jumped onto the bandwagon, by the way. It's been something that has annoyed me for years, because it celebrates this notion of overwork, which I think we're trying very hard as a society to adjust and correct, because work is important and can provide a lot of satisfaction, but it can also do a lot of harm when that's the only thing we're focused on. So tell us a little bit about Goodbye Busy, Hello Happy. Why should people read the book?
You should read the book if you know that your current way of being isn't serving you. So I guess the beauty of the book is it's 24 women and it's their story. For some, it's their burnout story. For others, we're experts in our field and we're just sharing, a bit of lived experience, but then also, some practical tips on how you can break your own cycle of busy. I'm like you, and I don't like the word either. And, I like to say that I live a full life, because I do live a full life. My life is constantly on the go, and I'm doing lots of things that make me happy, but it's full of the right things. And so therefore it doesn't feel busy. So people will say to me, oh, you're always doing stuff, like you've got your hand in this pie and your hand in that pie and you're over here and you're over there. I'm like, yes, I am. And I can do it all because I've got the right energy. I've crafted a life for myself that allows me to put my, do a bit here and a bit there. But it's a full life. It's not a busy life. And I think, the other great thing about the book is it's 24 different journeys, and there's something in it for everyone, like whatever stage you're at in your journey, you'll find a tip that will work for you, that you can implement immediately. So it might be something like, like you said, the meditation and yoga, introducing that into your life if that's where you align. There's a beautiful chapter by an Indigenous lady who, just talks about how Indigenous how they live a happy life, so bringing back things into life that bring you joy. And like for them, it's dance and connection. There's a lot about connection in the book because that's usually quite heavily linked to being unhappy and burnout and wellbeing. There's information just around, your physical space and clutter and the impact that can have on busy. So it's about, we've all got our own triggers. We all know what causes us to be, unsettled. And the book's just got lots of little 1%ers that will help, make you, help you make a difference. And I always say to people, read a chapter, and if it resonates, put a little earmark in it and then come back to it. If it doesn't resonate, move on, because not every story is going to resonate, but there'll be something in there that'll help you move forward.
Yeah, that mention of the 1%ers is awesome because it reminds me of James Clear's book Atomic Habits, and the fact that, to implement change in your life, whatever change you're seeking, it's very rarely that massive, I've got to shift this whole mountain so I can change it. It's often those incremental 1%ers, as you say, that over a consistent period of time will lead to the change that you're seeking, rather than taking it on as this big thing and this mammoth task that is too hard and too confronting to think about implementing. Yeah, that's awesome. And well, I will certainly check out the book. I love the title too, Goodbye Busy, Hello Happy. And I love what your distinction there with leading a full life, because others might look at it and go, yeah, that's not the life I want. I don't want it to be so full. And to that we say, good on you. Like you do you and I do me. And I love that it's full, but it's happy. Whereas often we get this busy and the overwhelm and the exhaustion and the disappointment and the expectations that can't be met and managed because it's so busy. So I really love that distinction that you make there.
And I think people then, they feel like they're letting others down, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Because you're busy doing the wrong things.
Yeah, and doing what you want to do.
Yeah.
So, and we'll put the notes into the show notes so people can access even the Conscious Living Hub and also a link to your book, because I think that would be hugely beneficial. And have you got a retreat coming up this year?
Yeah, we've got one in a couple of weeks, and then we'll be doing 2 more next year. So another one in Melbourne, and we're going to do one in the Hunter Valley or somewhere up in New South Wales, because my co-host is based in Canberra.
Oh, good. All right, well, we'll check that out because that would be a beautiful location. So it sounds like a couple of weeks to go for this one, but it sounds like 2024 might be the bet if anyone's looking for some time out. And how long do your retreats go for?
They go for 2 days. So start on a Friday and then finish around lunchtime on the Sunday. Yeah. Beautiful. And the goal, our retreat, I guess the difference is, yes, we provide opportunity for women to decompress, but then and we spend time working out their why. So why are they busy? Why they ended up where they are? But we'll absolutely make sure that you walk out with strategies. That's the difference for our retreat compared to just doing yoga or meditation. Yet you're spending your 2 days, enriching your soul, but you're not walking away with tips and strategies that's going to actually help you moving forward.
Yeah.
We also do some coaching either side of it too. So coaching session before and some coaching afterwards around that accountability stuff, so that, if you do fall into bad habits, you've got that chance to reconnect with us and talk about it and put in new strategies to sort of make sure that you keep moving forward.
Yeah, it's wonderful. It sounds fantastic, Ange. I'll make sure that we put those notes in so people can connect in with you, but also check out those amazing resources. And thank you. I've enjoyed our conversation. It feels very fulfilling and enriching. And I think that the work of leadership is hard. I always say that to people. I say that it's challenging not to turn them off it, but to acknowledge that it is super, super difficult. And what you've brought to light through this conversation is that importance of well-being and actually seeing it as a key strategy for you to achieve great leadership. Because I don't think anyone wants to, approach leadership and go, well, I'll just kind of do it in a half-baked kind of way, and I'll just turn up and lead the team and tell them some stuff, to do and instruct them. I think if we can make it an enriching experience for the people that we lead, because we are able to provide one, it means that we're leaders with more impact, which is really what we want to achieve. So thank you. Thanks for all those tips.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
All right. I look forward to having you on another time too. And I'm looking forward to our continuing discussion on wellbeing, because I think it's such an important thing for leaders to really focus on and to see it as a key strategy for them to enhance their leadership. So Ange Giacomo, thank you very much for being on the Leadership Lane podcast today.
Thank you.